Today on the Chesley Major channel, Black History Month special edition. We're going to be covering Anthony T Browder. Major salute. He's an author, publisher, cultural historian, artist, and an educational consultant. He is a graduate of Howard University of Fine Arts and has lectured extensively throughout the United States, Africa, Caribbean, Mexico, Japan, and Europe on issues related to African and African American history and culture. He has devoted 47 years researching ancient Egypt history, science, philosophy, and culture. He has traveled to Egypt 68 times since 1980 and is currently director of the ASA Restoration Project. Browder is the first African American to fund and coordinate an archaeological dig in Egypt. He has led over 30 archaeological missions to Egypt since 2009. His latest publication, Finding Karakomin, documents 15 years of excavation, restoration, and discoveries. He has written books such as The Nile Valley, Contributions to Civilization, also From the Browder File, 22 Essays of the African American Experience. Then he also has written Avatar, Cultural Historical Analyst, and From the Browder Files, Volume 2, Survival Strategies for African in America, 13 Steps to Freedom. When I first came in contact and encountered Tony Browder, I was about 14 years old when I read the Browder Files along with another book called Stolen Legacy. These books would change my life forever. But let's dive into some footage.
Self-described cultural memory specialist, Anthony Browder shares and celebrates ancient African history as it really happened, instead of the distorted image that the media portrays. After 30 years of research, he's discovered some things that might even surprise the most ardent African history fans. Welcome to the Rock Newman Show. Thank you.
Hey, Rock, it's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Cultural memory specialist.
Yes, sir.
Where did that come from? Why? How did it come about? And what does it mean?
Well, it's a term that I coined about 2 years ago to describe the work that I'm doing. If we understand that the history of African people is a history that has been distorted, it's a history that has been perverted, and to a large extent, it's a history that's been erased. So my job is to go back and recover the fractured pieces of our history and then to share it with my audiences in such a way that it wakens them from the sleep, the deep sleep that we've been in, that we've been socialized to be in and accept as our normal state.
He sure opened my eyes to a lot that I didn't realize, a lot that I didn't understand. He gave me hope and a sense of pride. But let's dive back into the video.
Is the 100th anniversary of Dr. Carter G. Woodson founding the Association for the Study of what was then Negro Life and History. It's now the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Dr. Woodson started that organization because he knew, as a Harvard-trained scholar, that the history of African people, people of African ancestry, so-called Negroes, so-called colored people, has intentionally been distorted. Hence his 1933 publication, The Miseducation of the Negro. So there was an intentional effort over the past 100 plus years to erase our memory after we had been stolen from the land of our ancestors and told that we were Negroes, told that we were colored, told that we were everything but a child of God. And so part of Dr. Woodson's efforts and those also of Dr. John Henry Clark is the 100th anniversary of his birth this year. So these are two men who I highly respect, who understood the importance of helping us restore our memory.
Carter G. Woodson wrote The Miseducation of the Negro. Carter G. Woodson stood for Black people, and he wanted us to understand that we must re-educate ourselves. Both him and John Henry Clark, as mentioned by Tony Browder, two great master teachers. Anthony studied under these guys, so I know his knowledge is unmatched. Let's dive back into it.
The first first human being, the first Homo sapiens sapiens, developed only in Africa, only in East Africa. You know, as a matter of fact, there is a new exhibit, a $20 million exhibit at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. This exhibit was funded by David Koch of the Koch brothers. It is an exhibit that is also being supported by the United States Congress, and it's in the David Koch Hall of Human Origins. In this exhibit, they acknowledge the fact that humanity only began in Africa, and that human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens, are 200,000 years old. But another important aspect in this exhibit is that they state a historical truth that these Africans began migrating out of Africa into Asia around 60,000 years ago, and it was only about 40,000 years ago that groups of these same Africans began migrating to Western Asia, to the continent that we now call Europe. So in that regard, we can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that the first Europeans were African.
As we know, we were everywhere. We are everywhere. We've been around the world more than 100 times over.
The original man
and back.
was a black man.
Right. The original man was African specifically, because we know that based on the archaeological evidence, but we also know that fact based on the mitochondrial DNA. Back in 1987, a group of geneticists studied the oldest mitochondrial DNA. Now, mitochondrial DNA is that part of your cell structure that is passed on to you by your mother. So we all are familiar with the statement, mama's baby, daddy's maybe. Everybody knows who the mama is. Daddy may be a question mark, but everyone knows who the mama is. And so by studying the mitochondrial DNA of a cross-section of so-called races and nationalities all around the world, these geneticists concluded that every person on this planet carries a mitochondrial DNA that has been traced to a group of women who are still living in Africa. Thus, there is no such thing as race. Race was a false construct created by racists in order to divide people based on color. So there is only one race, the human race, which had its origins in Africa. Thus, by extension, every person on this planet is of African ancestry.
Yes, you heard him right. We all descend from Africa. I can't debate or argue that fact. However, we are different.
Where was Jesus born?
Here he breaks down religion for the religious.
Where was Jesus born, and when was Jesus born is another question. If we accept the basic story, he was born in what was Northeast Africa before the Suez Canal was built. So he would have been a person of color, not the blonde-haired, blue-eyed individual that we see in many churches. His story is a story of the struggle of people of color against oppressive invaders. It's a story that resonates with most people of African ancestry.
Fact of the matter, Jesus was not white. But let's dive back into it.
So if we remember what Dr. King said, 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated hour in America.
Yes.
Black folk go to a black church and worship a white Jesus. White folk go to a white church and worship a white Jesus. But the issue is, if we understand the geographical reality of the place where Jesus was born, there were no white people there at the time.
We know this to be true. You've been hoodwinked, bamboozled.
But Scripture talks about Jesus being an individual who had hands and feet the color of not just brass, but burned brass.
Right.
That's dark.
Right.
And hair like lamb's wool.
Right.
That's not blonde and blue-eyed. When did Jesus and how did Jesus as a symbol become blonde and blue-eyed?
Well, most people that I know who are Christians and lovers of the Bible, lovers of Jesus, know nothing about a man by the name of Eusebius. Eusebius was a man who in 325 was Constantine's Karl Rove. He organized the Nicene Council and literally determined what books were going to go into the Bible.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So, what we understand very clearly is that every people have a right to interpret their relationship to the Creator as seen through their own cultural lens. But what Constantine did was to use this newly created religion, Christianity, as a means to not only control people physically, but also to control their minds. And it was Eusebius who called together, I believe, 88 bishops who met in Nicaea in Turkey, and they literally determined the shape and tenor of the Bible. So this book was constructed by a group of men for political and social reasons, and it was around that time, around 25 years later, that they actually determined when Jesus was born. Now, this is important because prior to 340 AD, no one knew when Jesus was born.
I can believe Anthony Browder when he speaks because he is always, mostly always, based in facts. Let's jump back into it.
And so there's a difference between belief and knowledge. Belief is something you accept without proof. But knowledge, whether it's religion or science or law, is based on facts. And I'm a person who is very guarded about my soul and who I trust my soul to. And I, as a thinking person, would never allow a thief, enslaver, to describe for me my religious and spiritual boundaries. I'm referring to a culture, when we think in terms of people of African ancestry who have been stolen by the tens of millions and enslaved all over the world, but most people don't know that it was Pope Eugenius IV who authorized the first papal bull giving the Portuguese the right to enslave African people. Now, it says in the Bible, in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not steal and thou shalt not kill. So if Europeans just followed those two commandments, we would be having this conversation in Africa sitting under a mango tree.
I must say he is right. The people who wrote this book do not practice what they preach.
We're not human beings, and we did not possess a soul. That then made it possible for every European nation, with the exception of Russia, to go in and steal tens of millions of African men, women, and children in the name of the Lord. So these are issues that are real, that are rarely discussed, but they need to be discussed if we're truly going to understand how we got where we are and truly develop a meaningful relationship with the Creator.
In the next footage, he talks about King James and how evil King James was, how wicked, diabolic, and demonic he was. And this is the person that commissioned the Bible. Let's take a look and see what he had to say about King James.
Characteristics that weren't so flattering.
Yes.
I thought you might have mentioned King James then. Tell us about King James, the writer, the commissioner, the author of the book that so many Christians today read.
Well, King James was a king, a ruler, who felt that he should not allow a ruler from another country, i.e. the Pope, to dictate how he was going to govern his people. So he decided...
So again, for history's sake, King James ruled England.
Yes, ruled England.
And the Pope was out of Rome.
Who was out of Rome, exactly. And there was a split between the Anglo-Saxons in the UK and Rome and the Vatican, because they understood very clearly that this is a game, that people have been using their relationship with God in order to manipulate other people, to wage war, and to do some ungodly things. You know, it can truly be said that right now there are more people on earth being killed in the name of God than are being saved by God, whether they worship a Islamic God or a Jewish God or a Christian God. So some terrible things have been done in the name of God. And the history of humanity is replete with the names of people who have contributed, who have engaged in these actions. But King James was a man who, I once heard Dick Gregory refer to him as a man who had, and he wanted to have a book, his own version of the Bible, that would allow him to engage his subjects in the manner that he wanted to and still be looked upon favorably by God. And so he commissioned a team of writers to write the authorized version of the Bible. As a matter of fact, when the King James Version of the Bible was written, only members of the royal class were allowed to read the Bible. Anyone who was a poor person, a middle class or poor person, back in that day in England would be killed, would be in prison for reading the Bible. So this was a text that was exclusively written for a small subset of the British population at that time.
I pretty much had to edit out some of the things he had to say about King James. I probably would have got a strike by YouTube. But today's Black History Month special edition was a tribute to Dr. Anthony Browder, Tony Browder, thank you for your years of service. Thank you for the wonderful books, the knowledge, the wisdom that you've bestowed upon me and my peoples. You are appreciated. For more content like this, like, share, and subscribe. I am Chesley Major. Until next time. Thank you for all your support, and thanks for joining me.